When Griffin came out of the procedure, he was intubated and on a ventilator. And I had to watch him fight, and I couldn't do anything. It was devastating and horrifying and overwhelming. So every day, I would just ask that my mom protected him and watched over him. This little tiny piece of her. I didn't even care about myself. I didn't care about her protecting me. I just wanted him to be okay. My mom, Mary Elizabeth, was born on December 14th, 1958, in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I do know within the first few years of her life, Mom had some complications with her heart. She had an atrial septum defect. So when she was 6, she underwent open heart surgery for the doctors to, as my grandmother put it, repair the hole in her heart. She was the youngest patient that the doctors performed that procedure on at the time. So we're talking early 60s. They viewed it as a success. But stories that I've heard growing up were that my uncles had to spend a lot of time in the waiting room at hospitals because they couldn't visit her when my grandparents wanted to go visit her. So she was in and out of the hospital a lot as a child. As a teenager, my mom developed a condition in her left leg called lymphedema. Lymphedema is a swelling of the tissues. The lymph fluid doesn't circulate properly, so the area of the body that's affected, it's usually in the limbs, swells. And it being in the early 70s, there wasn't much option as far as treatment. High school years are tough for anyone. And I think that with this swelling in her leg, it made her self-conscious. She twirled baton. She was a majorette, and they had to wear these short dresses and these white boots. And in the pictures, she looked uncomfortable because I think she was worried about what it would look like to other people. She had great friends and she had fun times. So I don't think it limited her, but I know it affected her. You know, it was something that was never gonna leave her. It was a part of her body. She never had a break from it. When my mom got pregnant with me, she was 21, a baby. I don't really know much about the relationship that my mom had with my biological father. I know that they dated and they weren't together very long. I know that when she got pregnant, he wasn't interested in having a child. She decided that she was gonna be a single mom. She worked at a local supermarket, and the November, December before she had me, she played Santa. You know, everyone is getting a kick out of this pregnant woman playing Santa. She was goofy like that. She was up for anything, and she would do anything for a laugh. I think there was a lot of experimentation when I was a baby. I do know that when she had to change diapers, she at times wrapped a bandana around her head and shoved an air freshener in the top. Props to her, she was very creative. She had a lot of ideas. From the time I was born until I was 9 years old, my mom and I lived with my grandparents in her childhood home. I never knew any different, so I never knew that it wasn't normal to have a mom and a grandma and a grandpa in your house. My mom and I were so close. We had so many adventures. So even as a single mom, she made things happen that now as an adult, I look back and I think, how did she do that? It was like magic. When I was 6, she said, we're gonna go to Disney World. We went on a plane, we went to Disney World. She wore the crazy Mickey ear hat because I made her. She answered the Mickey phone in the hotel room because I made her. And it was fun. It was really fun. When I was in first grade, my mom was working a lot. So I remember one afternoon I was outside playing. I was roller skating and I tripped and I fell forward on my face and I slid kind of across the road. And it was bad. I was crying. The neighbors came out. My grandmother came out. They brought me inside. They were cleaning me up. And I just remember wanting my mom. So she couldn't stay, but she came home because she knew I needed her. And she made sure I was okay. And it was right around Easter. And so I remember she went into her closet and brought out a stuffed bunny that she had gotten me for Easter. And she gave it to me. And she said, I have to go back to work, but Grandma and Grandpa are here and you have the bunny, okay? And you're safe and I'll be back. She wanted me to know that like she was with me, even though she couldn't be with me. My mom was a force. She had worked her way through community college. She worked her way through getting her bachelor's in early childhood. Then she made the decision to go to graduate school. The graduate school was in Boston, and she was getting her master's in child life play therapy. And I remember one night, I was definitely in my pajamas. It was definitely like bedtime. And my mom was studying and she was stressed. And she said, I really need some ice cream. And of course, being a 9-year-old, I'm like, ice cream? Let's go. I put on my long puffy coat. She puts on her long puffy coat and we go outside. It's winter. It's definitely February. It's cold. And we get ice cream. And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. She marched to the beat of her own drum. We got to do silly things like that, like get ice cream at night, because she was stressed out from studying. When she graduated, we ended up in Philadelphia. She got a job at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children as a child life play therapist. She worked primarily with kids that were on dialysis, so they had kidney disease, and they would have to come 3 days a week for dialysis to get their blood cleaned. So they would be hooked up to a machine for hours and hours. And these were kids of all ages. So my mom worked with them, giving them things to do. She worked with them on schoolwork. Some days were hard days and she had to just hold their hand. And some days they played games. And some days she put on silly hats or did goofy things just to make them laugh. One time, Randall Cunningham, who was a famous Philadelphia Eagles player, came to the hospital. And so my mom got to walk him around the dialysis unit and introduce him to the kids. And my mom did not like the Eagles. She was a New York Giants fan through and through. But she got her picture taken with Randall Cunningham and she was, a good sport. They even took the kids to Disney World one time. So all that magic that she would make happen for me as a kid, she was making happen for these kids who were dealing with some of the worst pain and the worst thing that would ever happen to them and their families. And she made it more bearable, and she made magic. And these kids and these families loved her. And all along, she still had health issues, but she took care of everything, even when she didn't feel well. My mom never missed a birthday. So even when I was in college, in the middle of finals, she would drive to see me. And she would make sure that there was cake and that there were candles and that the birthdays were celebrated. And I never thought it was a big deal. I was like, oh, you don't have to come. But it was a big deal for her. When I was young, my mom started saying, "I love you like a rock." And I was like, what? What is that? And she said, it's a song. It's a Paul Simon song. Loves me like a rock. And she played it for me. And it's an awesome song. And it kind of became our song. And she would start writing LYLAR on cards. And it's love you like a rock. She loved me like a rock. And she loved the people that she loved like a rock. So, Lilar. And every time I hear that song, it's like a gift from her. She did what she could to make sure that I knew that I was loved by her and that I was special to her. She was a really good mom. When I was 15, my grandfather got really sick. They found a mass between his stomach and his intestine, and it was cancerous. He had it removed, but he didn't wake up from the surgery, so he was in a coma. Every weekend, my mom would get out of work, come home, and we would get in the car, and we would drive to the hospital where my grandfather was and see him all day Saturday, all day Sunday. That summer into the fall, we were driving just back and forth between Pennsylvania and Vermont, and the stress was not great for her. She wasn't taking care of herself. She was just grinding, driving, just so that she could be there for him and for my grandmother. He ended up waking up from the coma and was moved to a long-term care facility. They called it a rehab, but I don't know. I thought he was gonna get better. But he was weak. This larger-than-life man, big guy, was in a bed for months. So around Thanksgiving, we had visited him. He was awake but unhappy. He was so unhappy. He had a trach to help him breathe and a feeding tube. And, you tell this 6'2" guy that, he's awake after being in a coma for so long that he can't eat. He was not happy. After that visit, my grandfather had gone back into a coma, and I was sitting next to him and holding his big hand, just telling him that I loved him and I wanted him to wake up. They had to make the decision to take him off life support. And they told us it could be a couple minutes or a couple hours. So we all just stayed with him. And minutes went to hours. And finally, kind of the decision was made that we would go to my grandmother's and get some sleep and come back in the morning. And my mom really didn't want to leave, but everyone kind of convinced her. And so the next morning, we were getting ready, and we got a phone call that he had passed away. And I think my mom was really sad that she wasn't with him when it happened. That was really hard for her, losing her dad. My grandpa, my pop-up, was my father figure. He would let me read the paper with him, and he had glasses. So I remember I asked for glasses too. And so either him or my mom popped out the lenses of sunglasses so I could have glasses and read the paper with him on his lap. He would put me on the top of the tractor when he was clearing snow for the neighbors. He was the closest thing I had to a father, and it was devastating. It was devastating to lose him. Not long after my grandfather died, my mom started having heart problems. Her heart was going into something called atrial fibrillation. And what the doctors kind of found was the scar tissue from her surgery when she was 6 started causing problems for her heart pumping. So instead of it pumping, her atrium would flutter. There are certain ways they can treat it with medication, which initially worked for her, but then it would happen again and her heart would go into the wrong rhythm again. They admitted her to the hospital and they shocked her heart so it would stop and then start up again, ideally in the right rhythm. And that worked, and then it didn't. So ultimately, they decided that she would need a pacemaker. And she did everything she had to do, but her life kind of just became smaller and smaller, and her body was against her. The lymph fluid started impacting her chest cavity and her lung function. They would have to put in chest tubes to drain the fluid from around her lungs so that she could breathe. She was carrying around this fluid, so she was exhausted. You know, she was in the hospital more, and I was there with her. I would go and I would sleep there because I didn't want her to be alone, because I knew she was scared. I was scared. She would say, why me? Like, I don't understand why this is happening to me. And the doctors didn't have answers for her. When she was in her early 40s and was really sick, my mom didn't want to stay in Pennsylvania. She really wanted to be in Connecticut, closer to family. And not able to be at work and being out so much for treatment, she ended up making the decision to stop working and apply for disability. It's a very long process. She had to have a lot of interviews and evaluations. There was a point in the meeting where they asked me to leave the room because she had to talk about how she wanted to end her life. And because of how much pain she was in. And she didn't want me to hear that. She didn't want me to know that. So she had to fight. You know, she had to fight to, to prove that she couldn't work. After a few years, part of being on disability, you're able to apply for housing that's reduced. And after a few years, her name came up on the list for a place near the beach. So I think it was good for her to be there. She had friends, she had the family, and there were just more people around for her. She was a big part of my younger cousins' lives. She was really close with them. She loved being an aunt. Stanley, TJ, and Sam were like the 3 little boys I think my mom always hoped to have. If her life had turned out differently and she had found a partner, I think she would have had more kids. But she loved those boys. She loved cheering for them. She loved hanging out with them. She loved doing whatever she physically could for them. Even when she wasn't feeling well, she would drive to their games and she would sit in the car and watch if she didn't think she could make it to the stands. That was the one thing about my mom. She would go to the end of the earth for someone she loved and to show them that she cared and to be there for them if they needed something. She drove to crazy places for football games and baseball games and hockey games. She loved those boys like they were her own. Mary, she was crazy. I can't believe I'm telling this story. My cousin was on a hockey team, and the coach was not a very nice guy. To the kids, to the parents, and she always joked that, like, if someone crossed you that, ooh, maybe they needed some voodoo, maybe she had to get a voodoo doll. So she made a voodoo doll of this coach. And she nailed it. And so she would show up at the games and, be putting pins in the head of the voodoo doll. And then asking the kids, did he have a headache? But that was just who she was. She was fiery and she was funny and she could make you laugh. She really could. She could make you laugh. Relationships were pretty difficult for my mom, romantic relationships. She wanted to be married. She wanted a partner. I think she struggled with self-confidence. I think the lymphedema made it hard for her to put herself out there. There were a couple people that she dated when I was young, but nothing ever kind of stuck. She was so great, and I wish someone could have loved her the way she wanted to be loved. When she turned 50, she had been dealing with the health issues that she had, and her life had changed so much. So I kind of decided I wanted to spoil her for her birthday. So I surprised her with a trip to San Diego. We went, and it was kind of eye-opening because I saw how much she was struggling. It was hard for her to walk. She needed to sit down a lot and rest. She was tired. We went to the zoo and she ended up needing one of the motorized scooters. Her finger beds under her nails would be purple because she wasn't having good circulation. Her lips would be kind of blue because her body wasn't getting what it needed. It wasn't getting enough oxygen. So what I had planned to be kind of this adventure for us, like we had had in the past, and me finally being able to do it for her instead of her kind of taking me on these trips, it didn't work out the way I thought. And when we got back from that trip, she ended up going on oxygen full time at home and ended up using a walker to stabilize her. I kind of realized that the fun and the spontaneity that kind of had always seemed to be there in our relationship changed. That she probably wasn't going to get to travel the way she wanted to anymore, and some of the dreams that she had weren't going to come true. When we had gotten back from our San Diego trip and her life kind of was changing, my life was changing. I had actually met someone and we started dating. And it was probably a couple of months and I really liked him and my mom really wanted to meet him. She was definitely always into whoever I was dating and like she wanted the scoop and she wanted to be included. She wanted to be in on it. So I remember we made a plan to have lunch and Mom met Jason. And that lunch lasted 3 hours, maybe? It was quite a while. She had a lot of questions, but they got along really well. And she was happy. She was happy that she got to meet him and that she got to know him. When Jason and I got engaged, my mom was really excited. And what I found out later was that she knew it was going to happen, but she didn't know when. Jason had asked her permission to propose. So I guess the few days before, every time I called or texted, she was anticipating very good news. And she was trying really hard, I think, to hold it in because secrets were not her strong point. I think she was really happy I had found someone to love me the way she wanted me to be loved. Probably the 6 months leading up to our wedding were really hard for my mom. She had fallen and broken her wrist. Her body it wasn't what she had pictured. It wasn't what she had wanted. She wanted to be participating and she wanted to be active and she wanted to be, the mother of the bride, Her goal was to get to that wedding day. And we talked about her walking me down the aisle. That was her job because she was mom and dad my whole life. I mean, to the point where I gave her Mother's Day and Father's Day cards and presents. And we talked about her and I dancing to Loves Me Like a Rock. But she was gonna need to be in a wheelchair at my wedding, and that didn't matter to me. Her being there was the only thing that mattered to me. So she was gonna let someone push her and walk next to me down the aisle. But the day of the wedding, she got really embarrassed and decided that she didn't want to do that. And she didn't want to do the dance. Even letting me just wheel her around, she didn't want to do that. I think she was just overwhelmed, and I think she was embarrassed because it wasn't how she pictured that day. As funny as she was, and as bigger than life as she was, and as charismatic as she was, she also hated attention on her, especially when it came to her health. I think that she tried to shrink inward and be smaller because she didn't want to have to be on oxygen and she didn't want to have to be in a wheelchair. So her making those decisions, it wasn't about me and it wasn't about not wanting to be a part of that day. It was more about I think not taking focus and not having to feel embarrassed. I was just so grateful she was there. It was a good day. I think she was happy. She was tired, but she was happy. After we got married, Jason and I went to Mexico. We were celebrating being married and on our honeymoon. We got to celebrate and we were kind of starting this new chapter and things were happy and it all just felt so good. And there was a lot, I think, that we were looking forward to. The day we were flying home from Mexico, My mom went into the hospital. My godmother brought my mom to the emergency room. She hadn't been feeling well. She was having trouble breathing. We went and visited her, and she wanted to know about our trip, and I was just kind of focused on her, and she was on an oxygen mask. It was one that was like kind of giving her forced air. They were trying to open up her airways because she was having so much trouble breathing. And I thought, okay, well, a couple days she'll be here and then she'll be back home and we'll figure out, what's next. And that week kind of spiraled. A couple days later, the doctor called me pretty late, said that they had to intubate my mom, which is they had to put a tube down her throat to help her breathe and put her on a ventilator to help her breathe. Jason and I drove to the hospital that night. She was sedated and she was intubated, so she couldn't talk. And when we left, she said, I love you. This is I love you in sign language. She said, I love you. And I still truly thought that she was gonna be fine. But a few days later, the doctor asked for a meeting with me. And we had to talk about what was gonna be next. She had been intubated with the tube for almost 2 weeks, and they talked about giving her a trach, which is a tube here that goes in that they could connect the ventilator to, which is what my grandfather had when he was sick in the hospital. And she always said, don't ever do that to me. So it was really hard because I wasn't prepared or ready to make that decision for her. I tried to talk to her about it, to try and gauge what she wanted me to do. And she just pointed to me and kind of mouthed around the tube like, what do you think? And then she told me she loved me again. I was gonna do it. I was gonna let them give her the tracheostomy and hope that her body would respond. But ultimately, the doctor said that doing the tracheostomy would probably just prolong the inevitable. So I had to make the decision whether or not to remove the breathing support and let her go. The nurse removed the breathing tube and they gave her medication to keep her comfortable, and everybody who loved her was standing around her bed. And it was peaceful. And I held her hand. And she passed away. It's the worst day of my life. Because I had to say goodbye to my person, my best friend, the person that knew me. The person that I loved so much. My mom was 53 when she passed away. I was too young. About 6 months later, my husband and I found out that we were going to have a baby. It was something that we had wanted and talked about, and it was something that my mom really wanted, to the point that the night she went into the hospital, when she was waiting in the emergency room, her and my godmother were hoping that there would be news of a honeymoon baby. It was exciting, but it was bittersweet because my mom wouldn't be there to be a grandma.
We're at the doctor's office and we're just making sure that the baby's heart is okay. And we're also going to find out if we're having a boy or a girl.
We did the ultrasound today and we're having a boy. It's a good day.
And that's that. I had had a fairly normal pregnancy. Everything was going along fine. And then when I was about 7 months pregnant, the doctors found that the baby's heart was not functioning the way it should have been. I had a lot of extra amniotic fluid, so they were keeping a pretty close eye on me and on him. And when I was just over 32 weeks, they made the decision to deliver the baby early. What we thought would be an October baby ended up being an August baby. And our son, Griffin, was born at 32 weeks via C-section. He immediately went to the neonatal intensive care unit to be taken care of. You're seeing this little being that was in your body that you were protecting and you were safe, and he had to be delivered early because it was no longer safe for him to be inside me. And then I had to watch him fight, and I couldn't do anything. So every day, I would just ask that my mom protected him and watched over him. And every day I would just tell her, please keep him safe. Every time I had to go home from the hospital while he was in the NICU, I would just say, please stay with him. Please keep him safe.
Hi, Dave. Hi, handsome.
He was hooked up to every tube and wire you could imagine. He would have trouble breathing. He would get like blue. His lips would be dusky, and they had intubated him, so he had been breathing through a tube down his throat for a little while, and then they changed him over to kind of a high flow oxygen where he had like an oxygen nasal cannula, but it was giving him high pressure to help his lungs. He had quite a few tests. They knew that his airway was floppy, but they didn't think that it was concerning. They were closely monitoring his heart. He was having daily echocardiograms where they would come in and ultrasound his heart and see how it was functioning and see how the pulmonary valve was doing. He needed a lot of support. They couldn't quite figure out what was going on.
Hi, Griffin. Hey, buddy.
We had been visited by the genetics team, and the doctor mentioned that Griffin may have some features of Noonan syndrome. He had pulmonary valve stenosis affecting the pulmonary valve in his heart. His ears were a little bit lower set. His chest was a little bit wider. I had heard Noonan syndrome before. It was something that my mom had looked into, but it wasn't something that was diagnosed. The doctors couldn't confirm it for Griffin. They had done some blood work and his blood work came back negative. So we kind of just moved forward with what could be treated: his heart, strengthening his lungs, and getting him as strong as they could so that he could be discharged and come home.
Griffin, what are you doing today?
We're going home.
What, Mommy?
We're going home.
We're going home, Griffin?
We're going home.
Sweet, man. That'll be fun.
On November 4th, 77 days after being born, Griffin came home.
Hey, Griffin, welcome home. What do you think, buddy? This is your house.
We were a family together under one roof with our baby.
At our bed, and we're hanging out in our room.
Look at that handsome boy in his big crib.
We were excited and terrified, as all new parents would be, but I think we had this lingering anxiety from being in the NICU and not being sure exactly what was going on with our child.
Uh-oh, you drove this past.
But we loved being home together.
Look at that baby. He doesn't have any clothes on.
We had been home for about a month. We celebrated Griffin's first Thanksgiving at home.
You're all bundled, Bubby.
We were starting to talk about me getting ready to go back to work, so we were trying to figure out what childcare would look like for Griffin. And we were still going to lots of doctor's appointments. There were a lot of follow-up appointments with a lot of specialists.
Mommy's fixing you all up.
Something that Griffin really didn't like was he did not like being in his car seat. And he would cry a lot in it. And we had an appointment scheduled and he was really unhappy. I just didn't feel comfortable taking him. So we were able to reschedule the appointment for the next day. And my husband and I kind of organized it so that he could come with us. The next day we were getting ready for the appointment and Griffin had fallen asleep. So we were like, okay, yes. Like I carefully put him in his car seat, buckled him in. My husband was driving and I sat next to Griffin in case he woke up and was unhappy, I could entertain him. As we were pulling out of the driveway and starting to drive, Griffin did wake up and he started to cry. And then it was silent and he was blue. And he wasn't breathing. As I was telling my husband to pull over and call 911, I was simultaneously getting Griffin out of his seat and putting him across my lap and starting CPR on my 3-month-old baby. My husband, we weren't far from our house, so he drove us back to the driveway, and as we were pulling in, I got a scream out of the baby. He was crying, I was crying. The ambulance came and brought us to the hospital. Griffin was admitted right away, and they were going to, the next day, do a procedure to look at his airway and his lungs. But until then, we kind of were just gonna wait. So my husband and I spent the next 24 hours holding Griffin, keeping him calm. The next morning, his test had kind of gotten pushed back a little bit because there had been an emergency. So we were just holding Griffin and waiting. And one of the nurses had asked us if we had eaten, and we hadn't. And so because he was sleeping, they said, why don't you go get something to eat and, you'll be back before he goes to the OR. We were gone maybe 30 minutes. And when we came back, there was chaos in Griffin's room, and in the hallway. And someone said to us, "Oh, you must have heard the code." Griffin had woken up, started crying, and stopped breathing again. And there were 20, maybe more, people in that hospital room and in the hallway, giving him CPR, injecting him with all sorts of medications, and shoving papers in our faces to sign because he was immediately going to have to go to the OR for an emergency procedure to look at his airway. When Griffin came out of the procedure, he was intubated and on a ventilator and sedated. The doctor said that his heart was pushing on his airway, and because his airway was still underdeveloped and floppy, his aorta, that part of his heart, the upper part of his heart, was enlarged, and it was pushing on his airway, causing his airway to collapse all the way so that he couldn't breathe.
I love you. I love you so much. Hello. Hi. You're okay. You're okay.
They said that really at this point, the only option would be for them to do 2 procedures. One, move his heart and attach it to his breastbone so that it wouldn't be pushing on the airway. And the second would be tracheostomy. He would have a trach tube to keep his airway stable and open until it was strong enough by itself. So then we kind of started another waiting game, waiting for the doctors to schedule the procedure and waiting for Griffin to be strong enough to have it. Griffin had an infection. He had actually developed a clot in one of his legs from one of the IV lines, from one of the lines that he needed additional medication for. We couldn't hold him. We had to be careful touching him. I was scared. I didn't even care about myself. I just wanted him to be okay. The trach surgery finally happened on his 4-month birthday, and we spent Christmas in the hospital.
Look what Santa Claus dropped off, Mommy. What did you think about Santa Claus? Oh, you're getting excited.
We still weren't able to hold him, so we went about 3-4 weeks without being able to hold our baby, which was excruciating.
You like holding Mommy's finger, don't you?
But about a week after his surgery, we were finally able to hold him.
It's been a long day, but I think they're both gonna sleep pretty good tonight, I hope.
And he smiled at us.
I love it.
Oh, you're so happy.
And that kind of made me feel like it would be okay, that he could do it, that he would be able to get through this, that we could all get through this. And it was a change. It was a big change. And our lives got turned upside down, but we were together. We had our little boy. And over the course of the next few years, he would show us like what a warrior he was.
Nice work, buddy. Whoa!
And how much he took after his grandma, Mary.
Hey! Look at you sitting up like a big boy.
The trach saved his life. And after about 6 years, the trach came out.
It's time.
Time for...
Bye-bye, trach.
Honey, you don't have a trach on. You look great.
Look at that.
His airway was strong. His heart was stable. And he is an incredible 9-year-old boy now who likes to run and laugh. And he's so naughty, just like his grandma. And her spirit is just so ingrained in him. And it's a gift to have a piece of her in my life still. When Griffin was in the NICU and we met with the geneticist, they had run genetic testing and nothing came back to really pinpoint why he had the medical problems that he did. So we had a follow-up with the genetic counselors, and they actually were going to refer us to a genetic counselor at Boston Children's Hospital. When we went to Boston and met with Dr. Roberts, we had talked about Griffin's history and that he had been tested for Noonan's, but it had come back negative. And I had told Dr. Roberts that my mom had actually been tested for it as well, maybe 10 years prior. And Dr. Roberts was intrigued, and she said, "Who is your mother?" Because I would have run that test. And I said, "Well, her name is Mary." And Dr. Roberts looked at me and she said, "I've been looking for her." And I told her, I said, "Well, she passed away." And she was really sorry to hear that. But what I had found out was that my mom had allowed them to keep a sample of her blood because apparently with Noonan syndrome, new mutations were being discovered. And a new mutation had been found in 2013. And they tested my mom's sample for it, and it came back positive for Noonan syndrome. Dr. Roberts said, "I am assuming that you and Griffin would both be positive because your mom had this mutation." We did get confirmation that he had one of the genetic mutations that caused Noonan syndrome, and that I obviously had it as well. I had never encountered any of the health problems that Griffin and my mom had dealt with, but I am hopeful for the future, but because my mom suffered so greatly, I'm also very afraid of what may lay ahead for my son. I don't want him to suffer the way she did. And I'm scared that something could happen to me. I don't want to lose out on time with him.
We made it just in time for sunset.
And as worried as I am with what the future could bring, I am just so thankful that I get to hug my kid every day. We're so lucky that he is stable and that he gets to be a funny, sassy, energetic 9-year-old kid right now. My mom was a list writer and a dreamer. And a few years after my mom passed away, I was going through some things that I had of hers, and I came across one of her bucket lists, and it so happened to be her travel bucket list. So there were places in the US, there were countries around the world, and it made me hope that someday, maybe seeing those places with my son is a way I can honor her in a way that helps me to heal some from missing her so much. She is still with us, her ashes. I have yet to kind of find a place for them. I think part of me is not quite ready to part with them, but Arizona was on her list, and we are going to travel there and find a beautiful spot and scatter some of her ashes. The day we left for Arizona, we had to get up pretty early to get to the airport. As we waited for our plane, the sun was rising. It was really beautiful. Our son was so excited. He was so excited. He just kept asking, is it time to get on the plane? Is it time to get on the plane? It was great to kind of live through his eyes of that excitement. But I just felt kind of that heaviness of what was to come. There's hardly a day where she doesn't cross my mind. So taking this trip and kind of having it being something for her, there was no way that that didn't sit with me on my heart and in my mind the entire time. As we were planning our trip, I had done some reading about Sedona. And what I uncovered about Sedona was that it's a very spiritual place for people. One of the places we visited in Sedona was the Chapel of the Holy Cross. It is a chapel facade built into the rock there. We went in and it was really more overwhelming than I expected. I'm not super religious. My mom wasn't super religious, but it was just a really humbling and peaceful place. And I got really overwhelmed. So I decided I would light a candle for my mom. I thought she would like that, wishing peace to her. I felt her. I felt her with us. One of the days we set out to explore Sedona, and we did a little bit of hiking. It was beautiful. And just looking out at the rocks and the rich color, I got really emotional. I really felt it. I really felt sad that she couldn't see it in person. Then we went up to Airport Mesa, and it was a pretty tough hike up. And I was so proud of our son. He did it, and we made it to the top, and just looking out at the different rock formations, I knew like that was the spot for her. There was wind and there were trees. I felt like she would love this. She probably wouldn't have been able to climb up to the top of that mountain because of her health and her body. So being able to do that for her was really special. I sat for a while thinking about her and kind of our adventures and what she would think of this place and what she would think of looking out at this beautiful view. I took a few deep breaths and decided, okay, it's time. And I scattered her ashes. After I scattered the ashes, I just kind of sat with her, and I was sad because I was letting a piece of her go. But it was bittersweet and beautiful, all wrapped up together. My son came over and he gave me a good squeeze, and I just said, "Buddy, I love you like a rock." And he said, "Oh, Mom, I love you like a rock." This trip was quite a big undertaking. I want to remember all of this. The peace I feel, the sun and how it felt, the dirt under my feet, I don't know if we'll ever go back to these places. I wanted to just have that memory with my mom. Grief can be really cyclical. And for me, even though it's been 11 years, it's still like a really, really tough thing to go through. And I'm still going through it. I miss my mom like crazy. And so taking this trip and putting the focus on giving her a check mark on her bucket list was really special. One of the other places on my mom's list was Alaska. And I didn't really know how I was going to pull that off. But as it turns out, my aunt and uncle, Michelle and Tom, and their 3 boys, Stanley, TJ, and Sam, had an exciting trip planned to Alaska. So I reached out and asked if they'd be willing to take Mom with them, and they said yes. She got to fly to Alaska and go on a little cruise, and they found a nice little spot to scatter her ashes there.
Aunt Mary, this is Icy Strait Point, and here you are to stay. I hope you had a good trip.
That's 2 checks on her bucket list. I wish so badly that everyone I know could have known my mom, especially my son. She was fun, and she was loving, and she could really turn things around for you. If you were having a terrible day, she could put it in perspective, or she could tell you a joke. It turned it around. It made you smile, and that force is something that I don't think anyone could ever replicate, but I wish everyone could know. Losing my mom the way I did really caused me to lose a lot of myself. It's almost like my makeup, my chemistry changed when I lost her. Being an only child of a single parent, there is so much of who you are that's connected to that other person. And she was the one that knew all the stories. And as I get older, I realize that I don't have all of the stories. I don't have any video of her. And I only have one really crappy voicemail that is still somehow on my phone.
Hi, Erin, it's me. I miss you. And I'm so proud of you. You're the best. I love you. Thanks. Bye.
I miss her picking up the phone just to talk. I miss hearing "Love You Like a Rock." I miss her laugh. I don't think it's possible to ever get over losing someone that you love so much. That is so ingrained in you. If she were here right now, I would just hug her. And I'd just love to see her hug my son, play with him, and sing silly songs with him, and hear him say, "I love you, Grandma." I don't know that my words could do her justice, but I hope that this is a way to show who she was outside of being sick and outside of having to suffer. I just hope this is a way to show her light and her humor and her magic.
You were there for my first cry. You were there for my first step. Kept holding my hand when you took your last breath. Now the world feels so big, and I feel so small without you around to catch me when I fall. I'm someone's mama now too, and I wanna honor you. You've gone away, but I'm gonna love this child the way you loved me. My heart's in pieces, but I know I've gotta try the way you love me. I can't see you, but I feel you in the breeze. God in my heart to love the way you love me. I need you now more than ever before. When I cry out your name, it's another locked door. Then I look in his eyes and see you looking back. It's like you're still here, and I'm just grateful for that. But I'm someone's mama now too, and I wanna honor you. You've gone away, but I'm gonna love this child the way you love me. My heart's in pieces, but I know I've gotta try the way you love me. I can't see you, but I feel you in the breeze. God in my heart to love the way you loved me. My world's upside you took your